Ghosts and Goblins Resurrection on the Switch is the new Ghosts and Goblins game, a remake of the original Ghosts and Goblins on the arcade and probably more famous on the NES. And to add to it, it's also my first game in this series, at least first one I actually tried to sit down and finish. Because I'll be honest, hard difficulty is not usually my cup of tea. Don't get me wrong, I totally understand why people like it, and I can enjoy a challenge and the overcometh of that challenge as well. And I believe the importance of difficulty goes beyond simply the game being hard or easy to get through. As, for example, it can be more important to other aspects of the game's themes and story, but the thing is, I believe that what ends up making difficulty such a contentious topic is that everyone perceives difficulty in a different way, and to add to that, there are various different types of difficulty, and that's why difficulty settings exist, and this game has them. Yes, that was a big intro just to say that a game has difficulty options, but it's important given how far they go here with this feature. While there is only 4 difficulty options, and I say only because that's a fairly normal amount of difficulty settings to have in your game, but the difference between its extremes is quite high. On one end, there is page difficulty, which would allow you to beat this game only in a couple of hours with a very generous simply respawn around the area you died system. It's interesting as a setting because while very forgiving, it still lets you experience the game and its difficulty. It honestly reminds me of playing those Wii ports of the Metal Slug series where you just have unlimited credits to just keep reviving yourself. And to put into perspective, someone who somewhat mastered this game and maybe could finish a level without dying once would probably not be able to notice the difference from page and squire difficulty, which is still one of the lower difficulties, but already working with your regular checkpoint system and, in my opinion, already being fairly challenging. But then on the other side of the spectrum we have legend difficulty, which aside from just being a lot harder, it also has no checkpoints like all other difficulties, making it really an experience, to say the least. Realistically, of course, most players will be playing in the middle difficulties though, Knight and the already mentioned Squire difficulties. Aside from checkpoints, the two other main ways this setting differentiates from each other are the amount of armor you have, aka how many hits you can take before you die, and how many enemies appear on screen, which, like I said when talking about the page difficulty, I think regardless of the difficulty you choose, that sense of challenge it's always there. Basically what I'm saying is they feel fairly balanced and they don't feel like they're watering down the game. The number never goes too low that it feels barren, or your armor too high that you feel like you don't even have to worry about it. All of these really just to say that there is a wide range of difficulties to play on and none of them feel like they're taking away from the experience of playing this game. And also, yes, the recording of this game was done in page difficulty, mostly just so you don't see the same thing over and over again because I'm not particularly good at this game. But now let's actually move on and talk about the gameplay. Move-wise, it is a 2D side-scroller and you can move left and right, of course, and also jump and crouch. Here not only working for platforming, but also being very important to the position in which you send your projectiles in, given you can only do it in 4 directions, left, right, up and down, and with the jumps not being able to be controlled mid-air, or in other words, meaning you have to commit with every jump, coupled with the large number of enemies on screen, you can probably guess why this series has the reputation it has. But I would be lying if I told you that it didn't feel good. Yes, having such a strict jump and also level design may lead to less satisfying and flowing levels, but given this game's focus on combat and its difficulty, it feels a lot more easy to forgive than other platforming focused games. Speaking of combat, there are quite a few projectiles you can find during gameplay, like flame attacks that create a small area of damage when they land, or balls that roll through the stage until they find an obstacle, hopefully an enemy. But the most common one is your average straight projectile that, well, goes in a straight line, which is whatever direction you point it in, usually being swords or knives. But the thing adding to this and also helping making this game slightly easier is the skill tree, where you can unlock special attacks, for example, allowed to freeze all enemies or create doubles of yourself that copy your movements and attacks. And I could keep going, but I think a lot of the fun and replayability of this already rather short game comes from unlocking and finding these out yourself. But of course, some of the most overpowered upgrades are on the top of the tree. At the risk of being a spoiler, things like being able to switch weapons at will and being able to restore your armor, especially that weapons one, given how often you can find yourself with just a very unhelpful projectile, especially for bosses, which is a nice transition to talk about the boss fights. But first let me tell you, there is of course a sort of mana bar to stop you from just spamming the special abilities. Also, that I don't know how to feel about the most powerful abilities being at the far end of the tree. Makes sense for attacking abilities, but I would rather get the examples I gave much sooner in the game, given that because of both lack of additional content to do and also just being a lot more skilled in the game, their position at the end of the game ends up putting them in a place where they have borderline outlive their usefulness when you get them. Anyways, then speaking of the bosses, they're pretty good. There is usually a checkpoint before bosses, so that surely helps them not be insanely infuriating, because they can be somewhat of a trial and error affair. It's not that their movesets are very complicated, as I would consider levels leading up to these bosses to be a lot harder, but it's more that you have a very small amount of time to react to their wind-up animations before the actual attack. And so if you don't already know the attack animations, then you're most likely to just get hit the first time you see them, which is not inherently bad, just something I'm pointing out. As while it may seem like a negative for making your first play most likely a failure, it does have the benefit of, when you do know the boss's moveset, making battles feel a lot faster paced, which is good, especially since you probably want to replay this game quite a bit. Last thing to say about the gameplay, it's the progression. While the game is very linear, there are moments in the short campaign where you can pick from 2 levels, meaning you can beat the main story without playing all levels, but of course I would suggest you do play them given the shortness of the game overall. Now moving on to the graphics and sound, this game actually looks really great. It seems the way the game looks can be a bit contentious online, which I don't personally get, but it doesn't matter here. This is my personal opinion and I really like it. It has a cartoony, hand-drawn like style and it's very colorful, yet dark, which I think really fits the gothic, more light, goofy aesthetic of Ghosts and Goblins, and also the very simple saving the princess story straight out of the NES period. Speaking of the NES, the soundtrack is a really good mixture of the new and the old, and I mean it in a literal sense, mixing that period accurate electronic sound with the more clean sound of real life instruments. It creates for something that I feel is very unique while also being very nostalgic of that NES sound. It is overall a very nice looking and sounding game, and for me it was definitely the best part of the game, as someone who can take it or leave it with the harsh difficulty of this game. But like I said, the new Ghosts and Goblins is very accessible regardless, but for that and other reasons of this simply being a very clean and polished game in its design, I'm giving Ghosts and Goblins Resurrection a 7 out of 10. It is very nice looking, and like I said, it is polished, but it's also short, especially if you're only in it for one playthrough, or even to just play each level once. That being said, I'm not putting a number on it because I think how long you take to finish, even when playing each level once, still varies a lot based on the difficulty you choose and your skill, which is true for any game, but it feels a lot more meaningful here. Now, in terms of recommendations, I do think that if you're a fan of Ghosts and Goblins, then yes, totally play this game. It is very worth it to you, and if you're not, then this is honestly a good entry point for the series, especially being a remake of the original, and once again being very accessible. But of course, you have to know if challenging combat focused platforming is something you enjoy. In terms of ports, then I cannot speak for anything outside of the Switch, given I haven't played them and they're not out yet by the time I make this review. But given the Switch version runs at 60 FPS, I see no reason the other more powerful consoles wouldn't also. But just always make sure to check regardless before you commit to another platform. Regardless, I hope this video helped you make your decision, and regardless of your decision, I hope you enjoy this video. And if so, please be sure to subscribe and even leave a like and comment, all things you can do for free here on YouTube. And regardless of that, I hope you're having a good day and goodbye.